Oh my god, Tone is back, guys. He's back. He made a video after like trillion years. So this video talks about when and how to get into hard rock, hidden hard rock and double time. And I already watched through it, and I sort of want to expand on some of the thoughts that he brought up. And I'll have the original video linked in the description. I highly recommend you all check out his video as well. Okay, so he talks about this idea of diminishing returns for some of the mods. And I think basically what he means is that like your skill set will become very narrow. Like at first you learn a mod so that you can broaden your skill set, but then if you're not careful, then it can actually narrow down your skill set to only being able to play that mod. And what he's basically saying here is that like hidden really only affects the reading aspect of the map, but it's not like, oh, it makes everything faster or it makes everything like AR10 and small CS, like double time and hard rock do, respectively. Hidden you can just kind of tack on to any kind of map, so it doesn't really prevent you from playing any certain skills. Also, earlier he talked about how he says hidden is kind of like preferential.
I like to think of it as a somewhat preferential mod since...
Yeah, so the way I like to explain hidden to players is hidden is basically like cursive writing, whereas playing without hidden is like print. And in case you guys don't know what I'm talking about, up here is cursive and then down here is print basically. Like if you know a certain word's meaning, then you're still gonna know its meaning in cursive. You just kind of have to know how to read it. And it's mostly transferable, but like this F, for example, like what the heck is going on here? Like some letters really change, and the R as well. Oh, and B. Oh my god, cursive B goes crazy. But yeah, like your ability to actually know what things mean is going to be the same. It's just a matter of like learning how to read it. So yeah, I think that's like the most apt analogy I've thought of regarding hidden versus no mod. Okay, so then he talks about how you should wait to learn hidden until you can play mid to high 4-star maps.
Learning it once you're comfortable with the mid to high 4-star range.
He actually has some pretty good justification for this. And basically, like you want to be able to at least know how the game works, basically. But one thing he says is that like you don't want to learn hidden on low AR because that's like really hard for people. So here's the thing about like low AR and beginner players. I think like a lot of people, when they're new, they just kind of play whatever is the highest AR that is comfortable for them to read. But then as their reading speed improves, then that like sort of maximum threshold improves. Like when you're a brand new player, like sometimes even AR7 or AR8 can be very, very fast and overwhelming. But then you just kind of keep playing, and as you get more comfortable, then that threshold increases to AR9. Like theoretically, you could say that, oh, when I was a beginner player, I could read AR8 and now I can't. But I think it's really more like you have always only ever read the highest AR that's comfortable for you, and back then it was AR8 and now it's AR9. Okay, this bit was very interesting. I'll just let it play and then I will talk about it.
I know some people will ask questions like, when do I hit the circle though? How do I know how many circles there are? And so on. But believe me, it's something you pick up with experience. It's not something that someone should or even could explain.
All right, Mr. Tony, that sounds like a challenge. Basically here he's talking about how like you just kind of have to rack up hours in the game or like with the mod in order to get adapted to how it feels. If I had to give tips on like when you should tap or like how to know how many notes there are. Okay, for how many notes there are, honestly, like it's the same as no mod. Like if you can't count the notes with no mod, then you probably can't count them with hidden either. The numbers in the circles are obviously there to help you. And over time, you start to be able to like recognize like what a 5-note burst looks like, or like what a 7 or 9-note burst looks like. I would suggest like being very conscious about like how many notes there are in a pattern that you're tapping. You only need to like consciously count the notes like a couple times until you start to recognize what it looks like just from like seeing the pattern and like seeing how many circles are on the screen, and like then you'll be like, oh, I've counted this amount of circles before, I know that that's like 7 or 9 or however many. And then of course the song is also always there to help you, and that's also what really helps with knowing when to tap the circles. All right, just to get a second opinion on this, I'm going to call up my secretary, my advisor, and let's see what the experts have to say about this.
Hello?
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 Yeah, so I got a quick question.
Okay, what's the question?
When you're playing hidden, how do you know when to hit the circles?
When I'm playing hidden, which I don't, I know how to hit the circles purely based off of like the song. When I'm playing hidden, I feel like it's just like ultra focus mode on the song, what's going on, like all the smaller, rhythms that you wouldn't usually pick up on. And I think it definitely enhances the OSU experience.
Hidden enhances the OSU experience?
I think so.
Oh man.
Thoughts?
Oh man. at like around 5 minutes in the video, he says that AR8 or like AR7 is kind of infamous for being dense.
Man, AR8 hidden or even AR7 is like infamously hated in this scene because of the object density, intense reading, and aim control that the general player base isn't particularly good at.
Okay, there's a difference between like an AR7 4-star and an AR7 like 2.5-star. It's not even about that. I don't even think that's worth talking about. It's just about like how the OC scene has evolved, because like back in like 2010 or whatever, like people rebelled against maps even being AR at 9 in the first place, because it's like, why are you making maps so fast? Yeah. Oh, another sort of miscellaneous tip for hidden. A lot of people leave the circle with their cursor before they actually tap. Basically, if you like consciously aim more slowly than you think you need to, that usually fixes a lot of problems. I think basically what happens is a lot of people leave the circle after the circle isn't there anymore, because when you're playing no mod, after the circle isn't there anymore, that means you hit it. So when you're starting with hidden, it's like, oh, okay, the circle's not there anymore. I'm just going to leave with my cursor. But you haven't tapped yet. And then you end up tapping after you leave the circle. And then what it actually looks like is you put your cursor on the circle and then you tapped, but then you still missed the note. And that's because you tapped after you left. So yeah, aim more slowly than you think you need to. And that's especially the case with low AR. Also, I would suggest downloading a program named Rewind, where you can analyze your replays and toggle off hidden. Yeah, I think when you're reading with no mod, it's a lot easier to be only visual, but with hidden, it sort of forces you to use the rhythm a bit more. Ideally, when you're reading, you use a mix of rhythm or like, you know, the music and also visuals. If you struggle a lot with reading with the music or like using the music to help you read, then hidden can definitely help you practice that. Okay, so at around 7 minutes, he says that Hard Rock one-tricking...
If they can't play anything else, this is severely damaging and provides diminishing returns.
Okay, so he says Hard Rock one-tricking can be severely damaging if you can't play anything else. That, I think, is true to an extent. It really depends on what your goals are with the game. Like, if your goal is just to be the best Hard Rock player and nothing else, then actually it doesn't make sense to play anything other than Hard Rock. So yeah, it depends on your goals. Obviously, if you want to be well-rounded, which is sort of the conventional view on like what makes a good player, obviously you don't want to only ever play Hard Rock. Later on, he talks about how you should be able to play a variety of mid 5-star maps before touching Hard Rock. I think that is true largely because like, so as the video mentions, Hard Rock bumps up pretty much every setting to 10, like AR10, OD10, right? And small CS. And you don't really want to jump the gun in difficulty. Mid 5 stars is where you find like AR9 maps or like sometimes like 9.2, 9.3 AR. And there's some like OD9 and there's some small CS there, like with no mod. If you're comfortable with those maps, then like you reach the point where like the next natural step is like AR10 or like maybe AR 9.8, which is basically AR7 plus Hard Rock. And yeah, and that's another thing, right? I think if AR10 is too overwhelming for you, then try finding maps that are AR7 or OD7 and use Hard Rock on those, because that is only 9.8, so it's a little friendlier to tackle.
As you'll find out if you're new to Hard Rock, the problem usually isn't the aim requirements, it's mostly the accuracy requirements. Lowering the star range results in easier patterns and therefore makes it easier to get used to the high OD.
Okay, so he says to use simpler maps basically to get used to the accuracy component of Hard Rock and the high OD. So that's true. I will give a fair warning that like if your accuracy is struggling on Hard Rock, it might also be because of AR10, not necessarily OD10. And also as a sort of aside, so for getting comfortable with AR10, I would suggest also practicing like AR 10.1, 10.2, or like 10.3 even. Basically, if you want to get comfortable with AR10, then it doesn't make sense to only ever cap your difficulty of like AR practice at AR10. Like even if you just get comfortable with 10.1 or 10.2, then going back down to AR10 should feel a lot easier. Yeah, but it's definitely true. Like you do want to use simpler maps to get into Hard Rock. I think like around 4 stars, which is actually what he mentioned as well. But yeah, 4-star maps are usually the best because they're like kind of conventional, like they're not like so super easy like 3-star maps, but they are still simple enough that you can just focus only on getting used to OD10, AR10, and small CS. Okay, so the way he explains double time, it kind of assumes that you're only using DT for like high BPM farm maps or just generic maps.
If you are a literal DT one trick, it means that all you're good at is reading high AR and playing fast maps, which is not good for your reading and not good for your versatility, because you're not exposing yourself to a variety of maps. So if you are a DT one trick to the point where you can't even read anything below AR10 or play anything under 240 BPM for example, I highly advise you revisit the fundamentals and you won't regret it either.
Oh, the sample gameplay here is actually pretty convincing of like what a DT1 trick looks like playing a normal map. So his definition of a DT1 trick is definitely true. That's usually what is meant when people say that someone's a DT1 trick, but I think this explanation of double time sort of glosses over the fact that like DT can be used on more than just farm maps and generic maps. Like I think DT actually, it offers like the widest variety of map styles in the game. I think it's actually the most versatile mod because you can use DT on like really old maps that have like funky rhythm or just like general like low AR maps, which can make like really dense speed stuff, which is actually really, really good for training and reading, or just like general awkward rhythm, finger control type maps. Like you can use DT to get like such a unique challenge that not even no mod can provide most of the time. Generally throughout the video, he emphasizes like starting with simple maps and working your way up. And definitely if you've seen any of my other videos, then you would know that I absolutely agree with that. The point really is just that improvement is incremental, right? I think that's a pretty non-offensive statement. And I would suggest you watch my video called Stop Watching Top Players if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that topic.
No matter if you choose to increase the AR slowly or just jump straight into it, you will have to end up using brute force either way. It's a completely new experience and your eyes haven't adjusted, so all you have to do is just play it and get used to it.
Okay, so he put a screenshot of a tweet that he made where he says, learning high AR or low AR than you're used to is basically about brute force. And actually for high AR, I completely agree. This is the advice that I usually give people, that high AR is one of the few skills in the game that you straight up kind of just brute force. There's things you can experiment with that help with high AR, like you can change your skin or you can turn up gamma, but ultimately, like as you play more of like a higher AR, then your brain will naturally sort of adapt to processing patterns at that speed, which is basically what he's talking about here as well. For low AR, I'm not so sure that brute force is like the only, like there's definitely strategy around learning lower AR, and it has to do with like pattern processing and stuff that is not really in the scope of this video. Yeah, and so when we say brute force, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can just brute force AR11, like just switch all the way up to AR11 and brute force. What it basically means is that you can gradually brute force your way up to AR11 by sort of like incremental increases in AR. But it's not like, oh, like you learn some strategy about reading high AR and like it just clicks. Actually, okay, I wouldn't completely say that. I think there's like a mental side to high AR where you can sort of like psych yourself out the AR, and it's like, oh, this is an AR that's like out of my reach, right? And then that sort of like, so like you only have so many milliseconds to work with high AR. So if you're spending some of those milliseconds like hesitating or like being scared, basically, then that sort of like clogs up your brain and like can make you read slower. But aside from that, I think like if you get the confidence side out of it, there isn't really much strategy with high AR. You kind of just need to adapt to that speed of reading. Yeah, I think those are all the notes that I had written down for this video. Overall, it's a pretty exhaustive guide to mods, and it's definitely targeted towards like newer players who sort of like grew up with modern maps. I guess that's why like DT isn't really mentioned in the context of like old maps or low AR maps, because that's not really popular amongst newer players. Also, I would suggest I have a more like formally structured explanation of hidden, hard rock, double time, and easy, which is at the end of OCPHD. So if you guys have not seen that video, please, at the very least, if you want to hear about the mods, then just skip to the end of the video. But I would suggest watching the whole thing. Yeah, let's just go watch OCPHD.